Case 1. On December 23, 2023, in Friendswood, Texas, 17-year-old Connor Hilton invited two close friends to his home. What was expected to be a typical hangout ended in violence. Hilton opened fire with an AR-15 rifle, killing Ethan Riley and seriously injuring Benjamin Bleek. Investigators stated Hilton showed no signs of panic or confusion after the act. In his confession, Hilton admitted he had wanted to kill someone for a long time, revealing this wasn't spontaneous. It had been considered. The crime stunned the community, especially given the calculated nature of the attack. At the scene, Hilton shot Riley and Bleek without warning. The shooting occurred in his own home, during a gathering framed as casual. Ethan Riley died from multiple gunshot wounds, while Bleek was left with severe injuries. Neighbors reported no indication of struggle beforehand. Hilton remained on the property and did not attempt to hide evidence or flee. The weapon was located nearby. Surveillance footage from neighboring homes confirmed the boys had arrived willingly, with no signs of forced entry or danger. The planned betrayal of trust made the crime more chilling. From the beginning, authorities suspected premeditation. Ethan Riley and Benjamin Bleek had known Hilton since early high school. Friends described them as a tight-knit group. Riley was involved in extracurriculars and known for his positive energy. Bleek survived but required multiple surgeries. None of Hilton's teachers or peers reported warning signs. He was seen as quiet but polite. His online presence showed no overt signs of violence or instability. The shooting came as a complete surprise to classmates and faculty. Hilton's betrayal was particularly hard to grasp, given the years-long friendship between the boys. The idea that Hilton could conceal such intent over time disturbed the entire community. The investigation revealed Hilton had retrieved the AR-15 from inside his home and waited until both victims were in close range. He fired with precision. The rifle was legally owned by a family member. Forensics found no signs of struggle from Riley, suggesting the attack was swift. Bleek's wounds indicated he attempted to flee or resist after the first shots were fired. Hilton confessed on the scene and later gave detectives a detailed account of his motivations. He claimed he wanted to know what it felt like to kill and chose people he knew because it would be easier. These statements eliminated doubt about motive. Hilton was arrested at the scene without resistance. He was taken into custody and charged with murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. In interviews, he did not display remorse. When asked why he chose to kill that day, Hilton responded that he had felt ready. His statements showed he had been thinking about committing a murder for some time. The defense team initially explored whether medication for acne, Accutane, might have contributed to his behavior. But prosecutors pointed to his detailed confessions and planning as clear signs of intent. The court ruled out diminished capacity based on medical testimony. In September 2025, Hilton pleaded guilty, avoiding a public trial. He received a 50-year sentence for murder and 20 years for assault, to be served concurrently. Under Texas law, he will be eligible for parole after serving 25 years. The courtroom remained silent as families listened to the sentence. Bleek, the surviving victim, addressed Hilton directly, questioning his tears in court as performative. Riley's parents described the enduring pain of losing their son and the betrayal by someone they welcomed into their home. The case was covered widely in state media, cited as an example of hidden violence and the unpredictability of adolescent offenders. Case 2. In 2017, London police uncovered one of the most disturbing terror plots ever involving a minor. Safa Buller, a teenager influenced by ISIS ideology, planned to detonate grenades and carry out knife attacks at the British Museum. She was only 17 years old when she became the center of the UK's youngest all-female terror cell. Investigators later confirmed that her motivation stemmed from online radicalization. The plot, though stopped in time, revealed how digital extremism could turn a quiet teenager into a willing instrument of mass violence. The case began when MI5 analysts intercepted coded online messages referring to an event described as a tea party. The phrasing seemed harmless but triggered suspicion after it appeared repeatedly in encrypted chat rooms known for extremist activity. Counterterrorism units began monitoring the sender, who was traced to Bueller's London address. Within days, agents identified communications detailing weapon acquisition and public targets. The decision to strike was made after she received instructions for assembling homemade explosives. When officers raided her home, they discovered handwritten plans outlining a public attack in Central London. The early interception prevented what authorities called a mass casualty event. Bueller's path to radicalization began online at age 16. She spent hours watching extremist propaganda and communicating with individuals posing as mentors. Her social media history revealed a gradual transformation from curiosity to ideology. At home, she lived with her mother and sister, both later implicated for their involvement. The sisters maintained regular contact with overseas recruiters who promised them purpose and sacrifice. Friends described Bueller as quiet and withdrawn before the arrest, with no overt signs of extremism. Yet investigators found digital evidence showing she had already pledged allegiance to ISIS, viewing herself as part of a broader cause. Her radicalization reflected how easily ideology could infiltrate ordinary homes through digital networks. Surveillance footage and phone records confirmed consistent communication between Bueller and a known ISIS operative based abroad. The encrypted chats detailed her intent to target large crowds at the British Museum during peak visiting hours. Investigators decrypted several messages that outlined attack methods, including the use of pressure cooker explosives and close-range knife assaults. The coordination between her sister, and another woman demonstrated a structured attempt to carry out simultaneous acts of terror. MI5 officials described the level of organization as unprecedented for an individual of her age. Every recovered message reinforced the seriousness of the plot and the precision of its planning. Police arrested Safa Bueller before the attack could occur. During the raid, counterterrorism officers found her devices still active in encrypted chat applications. The recovered messages contained final instructions from an overseas contact urging her to act immediately. Bueller and her family were taken into custody under the UK's Terrorism Act. During court proceedings, prosecutors presented surveillance footage, recovered documents, and online correspondence linking her directly to recruitment networks. The defense acknowledged her involvement but emphasized her youth and influence by manipulative figures online. Despite this, the court determined her actions demonstrated full awareness of the consequences. In 2018, Bueller was convicted of preparing acts of terrorism. The judge called the case a warning of how digital platforms could be weaponized for ideological recruitment. She received a life sentence with a minimum term of 13 years before eligibility for parole. At sentencing, the court highlighted her age but also the gravity of her intentions. Bueller remains the youngest woman in the UK ever convicted for plotting a terror attack. Her case reshaped how British counterterrorism agencies approach youth radicalization and online extremism, marking a pivotal moment in national security policy. The planned attack never took place, but its exposure left a lasting imprint on how early digital signals of extremism are now treated as potential threats. Case 3. In May 2024, the quiet city of Casper, Wyoming, became the scene of a calculated killing that stunned the community. 17-year-old Evan Castiner had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, 18-year-old Lana Brown, for weeks after she ended their relationship. On a calm spring afternoon, he confronted her near a neighborhood park and shot her execution style at close range. Witnesses reported hearing a single gunshot followed by silence. When officers arrived, Brown was found lying on the walking path with fatal injuries. The investigation quickly revealed that the act had been planned, not impulsive. The events leading to the murder began days earlier when Castiner sent Brown a series of threatening messages. In them, he accused her of humiliating him and warned that she would regret ending the relationship. Friends of Brown urged her to report the messages, but she hesitated, believing he was venting frustration rather than making a credible threat. On the evening of May 14, Brown went for a walk near a public park as part of her usual routine. Surveillance footage later showed Castiner's car circling the area multiple times before stopping along her route. Moments later, Brown was shot once in the head. The precision and lack of hesitation pointed to deliberate intent. Lana Brown was a recent high school graduate with plans to attend community college in the fall. She was known for her easygoing nature and close friendships. Those who knew her described her as kind and trusting, someone who avoided confrontation. Her relationship with Castiner had lasted nearly a year before ending quietly in early April. Friends later told investigators that she had grown increasingly uncomfortable with his controlling behavior. Despite clear signs of obsession, there was no history of police reports or restraining orders. Brown's family later said she underestimated his unstable ID, unaware of the depth of his anger. Detectives obtained search warrants for Castiner's phone and vehicle within hours of the shooting. Digital forensic analysis revealed that he had tracked Brown's movements using a location-sharing app she had forgotten to disable. GPS data placed him at the crime scene minutes before the shooting. Text messages, internet searches about clean gunshot execution, and how to erase GPS history, and deleted photos of Brown were all recovered. A spent cartridge found near the body matched the handgun seized from his home. Police concluded that Castiner had followed Brown for several days, waiting for an opportunity when she was alone. The timeline eliminated any notion of spontaneity. Castiner was arrested at his residence without incident less than 12 hours after the shooting. During questioning, he showed no visible emotion and admitted to the crime in a detached tone. When detectives asked why he had done it, he replied that he wanted her to feel what he felt. There were no signs of remorse throughout the interviews. Psychologists who evaluated him later described his demeanor as cold and analytical, displaying traits consistent with antisocial behavior. Prosecutors argued that his confession demonstrated premeditation rather than emotional breakdown. The case was built almost entirely on his own words, combined with overwhelming digital evidence. In February 2025, Castiner was sentenced to serve 42 to 75 years in state prison for first-degree murder and weapons charges. The court rejected any plea for leniency based on his age, citing the deliberate nature of his actions. During sentencing, Brown's family urged the public to take online threats seriously, emphasizing how easily warnings can be dismissed until it is too late. The case became a reference point in Wyoming for discussions around digital stalking and teenage relationship violence. For the community, the murder of Lana Brown was a reminder that danger can emerge quietly from someone once considered safe. Case 4. In March 2019, the small town of Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire was shaken by the discovery of a newborn's body inside a household bin bag. 19-year-old Paris Mayo had secretly given birth at home and suffocated the infant shortly after delivery. She hid the body in a plastic bag and left it for her family to find. The event revealed a tragedy concealed behind closed doors, one that combined secrecy, fear, and deliberate intent. When questioned, Mayo claimed she hadn't realized she was pregnant, a statement soon challenged by investigators. The case began when Mayo's family discovered the infant's remains the morning after the birth. Her mother found the bag while cleaning and called authorities immediately. Paramedics and police arrived at the scene, confirming that the baby had been deceased for several hours. Mayo appeared pale and disoriented, insisting she had been unaware of the pregnancy and believed the baby was stillborn. Detectives noted inconsistencies in her account, especially the state of concealment and the absence of panic that would typically accompany a medical emergency. The discovery initiated a detailed forensic investigation, revealing evidence that contradicted her initial explanation. Paris Mayo lived at home with her parents and younger brother. Friends described her as reserved, with few close social contacts. Throughout the pregnancy, she continued her daily routine and concealed physical changes by wearing loose clothing. No one in her family suspected she was expecting a child. Medical records showed she had not attended any prenatal appointments or sought healthcare advice. Investigators later determined that the father of the child was an older man, though he was not implicated in the crime. The hidden pregnancy, coupled with her calm demeanor after birth, led police to suspect an intentional act rather than a panic-driven reaction. The post-mortem examination provided critical findings. The infant had suffered severe head trauma, including multiple skull fractures, consistent with blunt force impact shortly after birth. There were also clear signs of suffocation. DNA tests confirmed Mayo as the biological mother, eliminating any doubt. Digital forensics recovered online searches from her phone related to late-term pregnancy symptoms and concealment. The data showed she had knowledge of her condition well before the birth, contradicting her claims of ignorance. Detectives also found deleted text messages indicating fear of family reaction if the pregnancy were revealed. Each new detail pointed toward a deliberate attempt to hide both the pregnancy and its fatal outcome. Mayo was arrested on suspicion of murder and later charged with infanticide. During questioning, she maintained that she believed the baby was stillborn and acted in panic. However, the prosecution argued that her actions, the suffocation, concealment, and failure to seek medical assistance, demonstrated premeditation. Expert testimony from medical professionals confirmed the baby had been born alive and healthy. The court concluded that Mayo's behavior after the birth, including her methodical concealment, ruled out temporary insanity or loss of control. Her statements to police were found to be inconsistent, and the physical evidence directly contradicted her narrative. In June 2023, Paris Mayo was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, with a minimum term of 12 years before eligibility for parole. The judge described the case as a devastating combination of secrecy and cruelty. The ruling highlighted the legal distinction between infanticide and intentional homicide, emphasizing that evidence supported the latter. In 2025, her defense team filed an appeal, arguing that her mental state and age at the time warranted reconsideration of the sentence. The case continues to draw public attention, raising complex questions about denial of pregnancy, adolescent psychology, and accountability in crimes involving newborns. Case 5. May 2019, Wiltshire. 17-year-old Thomas Griffiths traveled to the home of his former girlfriend, Ellie Good, and stabbed her 13 times. The attack occurred after a recent breakup. When officers arrived, the scene suggested extreme violence and a single assailant. Initial observations included multiple puncture wounds and blood spatter patterns inconsistent with an accidental injury. Investigators noted that the severity and number of wounds pointed to an intent to kill rather than an isolated outburst. The presence of staging elements at the scene immediately raised questions about the account later offered by the defendant. Good's body was discovered with a knife positioned as if self-inflicted, and Griffiths initially claimed he had come upon a scene of self-harm. Emergency responders described the placement of the weapon and the victim's posture as atypical for a self-inflicted wound. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices earlier in the evening, but did not report seeing a forced entry. Forensic teams documented the scene extensively, recording blood spatter, wound trajectories, and the location of a discarded phone. The purported self-harm explanation prompted investigators to scrutinize both physical evidence and the defendant's narrative for inconsistencies that might indicate staging. Ellie Good had recently ended a relationship with Griffiths after a period of escalating conflict. Witness statements described a volatile dynamic in the final weeks before the attack, with arguments and warnings from peers about his instability. Good was remembered by friends and family as cautious following the breakup, taking steps to limit contact. Griffiths had a documented history of substance use and previous incidents that suggested difficulty managing anger. Those who knew him described him as capable of intense emotional responses. The relationship context, combined with prior behavioral indicators, framed the attack as the culmination of escalating tension rather than an isolated incident. Forensic analysis produced key contradictions to Griffiths' initial claim. Medical examiners detailed defensive wounds on the victim that indicated a struggle, and analysts determined that several of Griffiths' injuries were self-inflicted in a manner inconsistent with immediate intervention. Blood spatter analysis placed the primary assault at a location within the home where Griffiths admitted he had been present. Trace evidence connected Griffiths to the weapon and the scene in ways that undermined the self-harm narrative. Investigators also recovered phone records showing deleted messages and searches consistent with planning or cover-up. The totality of physical and digital evidence suggested the scene had been intentionally altered to mislead authorities. Confronted with forensic inconsistencies, Griffiths provided a subsequent statement admitting his involvement in the attack. He described a confrontation that escalated into violence, then acknowledged efforts to stage the scene to support an alternate explanation. The confession followed detailed questioning about wound patterns and the physical impossibility of his initial account. Arrest procedures were carried out promptly after the statement, and Griffiths was taken into custody without resistance. Prosecutors emphasized the confession and the forensic linkage when filing charges, framing the case as premeditated assault culminating in homicide. At trial, the court weighed the forensic record, witness testimony, and Griffiths' admissions. The jury found him guilty of murder. Sentencing reflected both the brutality of the attack and his age at the time, resulting in a life sentence with a minimum term of 12.5 years before eligibility for parole. In the wake of the verdict, Good's family and local advocates called for strengthened protections and education regarding domestic violence among young people. Campaigns citing the case argued for clearer reporting mechanisms and better support for those exiting volatile relationships. The conviction and its aftermath sustained public attention on the risks posed by intimate partner violence in adolescent populations. Case 6. November 2009, South Dakota. Maricela Nicolasa Diaz, a teenage girl and her boyfriend carried out a brutal murder that would leave an entire community shaken. Their victim was 16-year-old Jasmine Guevara, who was found stabbed multiple times and burned in a remote area. The level of violence and deliberate concealment led investigators to believe this was a crime driven by emotion and planned aggression. What appeared at first to be a senseless attack soon revealed the dangerous undercurrents of jealousy and manipulation that had brewed beneath the surface of a teenage social circle. Jasmine's body was discovered in a secluded area, partially burned and bearing numerous stab wounds. The brutality shocked even seasoned investigators. Initial confusion surrounded the cause and context of her death, but forensic examination revealed that the injuries had been inflicted before the fire was set, ruling out any accidental involvement. Evidence at the scene, along with witness statements, quickly pointed to Maricela and her boyfriend as persons of interest. Their behavior in the days following the murder raised red flags, particularly their inconsistent accounts and apparent lack of remorse. Jasmine had known Diaz socially through mutual connections at school. There had been previous signs of tension and jealousy, particularly surrounding Diaz's relationship. Witnesses recalled hostile remarks and minor conflicts that escalated over time. Investigators later concluded that Diaz viewed Jasmine as a threat to her relationship, and that the murder had been a calculated act of control and elimination. The motive was not one of random violence, but of deep-seated envy and emotional obsession. The social environment around the teens, marked by rivalry and secrecy, served as a toxic backdrop for the crime. Authorities obtained a confession early in the investigation, with Diaz detailing her role in the killing and implicating her boyfriend. However, as the case progressed, Diaz attempted to recant portions of her confession, claiming coercion and misunderstanding. The defense argued that she was under emotional duress and possibly manipulated by her partner. Despite these claims, the forensic evidence, including matching DNA and eyewitness testimony, corroborated her original statements. Appeals citing interrogation issues were filed, but ultimately rejected by the courts, affirming the strength of the initial confession and the surrounding case facts. Diaz was charged and tried as an adult due to the severity of the crime. Despite her age at the time of the murder, the prosecution successfully argued that the brutality and premeditation warranted adult sentencing. In 2015, she was sentenced to 80 years in prison with parole eligibility after 40 years. The boyfriend received a similar sentence. The case was widely publicized in South Dakota and sparked discussions about teenage violence, peer influence, and the psychological vulnerability of adolescents under toxic emotional pressure. It remains one of the most disturbing juvenile crime cases in the state's history. Case 7, April 2021, Las Vegas. In a crime that shocked the community and gained national attention, Sierra Halseth, a teenager, conspired with her boyfriend to kill her father, Daniel Halseth. After brutally stabbing and setting him on fire, the couple was seen in a disturbing video, laughing and joking about the murder while documenting their escape. The lack of remorse and cold detachment from reality captured on camera became a chilling centerpiece of the investigation and eventual sentencing. What began as a family conflict over a forbidden relationship ended in one of Nevada's most disturbing domestic murder cases. The attack was triggered by escalating tensions between Sierra and her father over her relationship with her boyfriend. Daniel Halseth, a former Nevada state senator, had grown increasingly concerned about the influence of Sierra's boyfriend and had taken steps to separate the two, including limiting contact and enforcing strict boundaries at home. On the day of the murder, the couple carried out a premeditated attack, stabbing Daniel multiple times before setting fire to the home in an attempt to destroy evidence. The body was discovered after the fire department responded to the blaze. By then, Sierra and her boyfriend had already fled the scene. Daniel Halseth was a well-known figure in Nevada politics, respected for his past role as a state senator and known as a devoted father. He had recently expressed concerns about his daughter's well-being and her increasingly rebellious behavior. Friends and family described Daniel as strict but protective. His objection to the relationship was rooted in fear for Sierra's safety and emotional health. The murder shattered a family and ignited conversations about teen relationships, manipulation, and the limits of parental control. The betrayal by his own daughter added another layer of horror to an already tragic case. Police quickly uncovered evidence pointing to premeditation. Surveillance footage captured the couple purchasing cleaning supplies and other items shortly before the crime. Most damning was a video on Sierra's phone, recorded after the murder, showing her and her boyfriend laughing in a car about their actions, making flippant remarks, and mocking the situation. Digital evidence also included text messages and search history indicating plans to flee. The confessional nature of the footage and its casual tone were central to the case. Detectives described the video as one of the most unsettling pieces of evidence they had ever seen. The couple was apprehended in Salt Lake City, Utah, several days after the murder. They were traveling by train and had dyed their hair to alter their appearance. Both were arrested without incident and extradited back to Nevada. Charges included murder, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and evidence tampering. Prosecutors emphasized the methodical planning and callous aftermath as aggravating factors. Despite their young age, both were tried as adults. The defense attempted to argue coercion and immaturity, but the overwhelming evidence, including the confession video, left little room for mitigation. In 2022, Sierra Halseth was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Her boyfriend received the same sentence. The video, described by the judge as haunting and dehumanizing, was instrumental in the court's decision. During sentencing, members of Daniel Halseth's family spoke of the pain, betrayal, and irreversible damage caused by Sierra's actions. The case continues to be cited in discussions around juvenile justice, psychological manipulation, and the dangers of unchecked teen relationships. It remains one of the most high-profile parricide cases in recent U.S. history. Case 8. March 2015, Wisconsin. 17-year-old Ashley Martinson shot her mother and stepfather inside their rural home, then locked herself in her bedroom for hours before fleeing the state. The case gained widespread attention due to her online identity as a horror blogger who wrote violent fiction under the pseudonym Vampchick. The contrast between her creative persona and her real-life crime drew national interest. When investigators examined her digital history, they found writing that eerily mirrored the method and tone of the murders she would later commit. According to Ashley, the killing stemmed from years of mistreatment and fear. She later told investigators that her stepfather was controlling and abusive, and that her mother allowed the behavior to continue. On the morning of March 7, an argument escalated, and Ashley retrieved a shotgun from the family's collection. She shot her stepfather in the chest and face, then turned the weapon on her mother. Afterward, she locked her younger sisters in a bedroom to shield them from the scene, left food and water, and fled the house. Prosecutors later described her actions as deliberate and calculated, not impulsive. Ashley's writings painted a disturbing portrait of her inner world. Her horror blog contained short stories about revenge, blood, and escape, with protagonists often seeking freedom through violence. Friends and classmates recalled that she had withdrawn in the months leading up to the crime. Her stepfather, identified as Thomas Ayers, was a former truck driver with a reputation for strict discipline. Investigators later found evidence supporting Ashley's claims of household tension, including prior reports of domestic disturbances. The relationship between Ashley and her parents had been fractured by fear, resentment, and isolation long before the killings occurred. Following the shootings, Ashley fled to Indiana with her 22-year-old boyfriend. The two were located the next day after authorities traced her cell phone. Police arrested her without resistance at a friend's home. In her possession were notebooks, phone records, and a laptop containing her horror stories. Digital forensics confirmed the authorship of her violent posts, some of which had been written just days before the murders. These writings became key pieces of evidence for prosecutors, establishing a mindset of anger and fantasy-driven revenge. Her case drew comparisons to fictional narratives of teenage rebellion that blurred the line between art and reality. Martinson accepted a plea deal to avoid trial, pleading guilty to 2 counts of second-degree intentional homicide. Prosecutors acknowledged her claims of abuse but argued that the crime was premeditated. The plea spared her from a possible life sentence. During sentencing, she appeared calm and detached, speaking only briefly about her motives. She expressed that she had lived in fear and felt trapped in her home environment. Psychological evaluations described her as intelligent and remorseful but emotionally stunted, shaped by prolonged trauma and fantasy escapism. The judge described the case as a tragedy born from abuse and obsession. Ashley Martinson was sentenced to 23 years in prison followed by 17 years of supervision. In interviews conducted later, she stated that prison had brought her stability and safety, feelings she said she had never experienced at home. Her words reignited debate about the intersection of trauma, accountability, and youth violence. The case remains a grim example of how chronic domestic abuse and unchecked emotional distress can lead to catastrophic acts of retaliation. In Wisconsin criminal history, Martinson's story stands as a modern cautionary tale about the thin boundary between imagination and reality. Case 9. In October 2016, Georgia police responded to a report that would soon unravel into a confession. 17-year-old Dakota White led officers to the body of his friend, Sam Poss, after admitting he had killed him. The revelation followed an interrogation in which White described wanting to know what it felt like to take a life. Investigators treated the admission as central to the case, citing it as evidence that the killing was not accidental. The community confronted a new and unsettling reality. The defendant had stated curiosity as a motive. Poss's body was located where White indicated, and forensic teams recorded multiple stab wounds to the neck and torso. The scene showed signs of a brief struggle, but no prolonged attempt at concealment. White had indicated the location and guided officers to the exact spot, reducing initial uncertainty about the victim's disposition. Medical examiners established a clear cause of death consistent with the wounds observed. Poss's identity and the immediate circumstances left investigators with a direct trail from confession to physical evidence, framing the inquiry that would follow. Sam Poss had been known to White as an acquaintance and friend within a shared social circle. Those who knew Poss described him as trying to build stability after recent life changes and not prone to confrontations. White and Poss had interacted in school and neighborhood settings, sometimes casually but without documented conflict. The apparent absence of a sustained motive beyond White's expressed curiosity made the case particularly difficult for friends to reconcile. The victim's family later emphasized Poss's plans and potential, underscoring the senselessness of his loss. Investigators secured White's voluntary cooperation and followed leads that corroborated his account. White guided police to the scene, identified the weapon's likely disposal area, and described the sequence of events leading to the attack. Forensic technicians recovered blood evidence consistent with White's statements and matched trace materials to clothing found in his possession. Digital forensics reviewed recent communications and behavior patterns. While no extended plotting was evident, the totality of material aligned with White's confession and the physical record at the scene. Each finding narrowed the gap between admission and proof. White was taken into custody without resistance after directing officers to the location. During subsequent interviews, he elaborated on his motive, describing a desire to experience the act of killing. Prosecutors used his on-scene cooperation and detailed statements as foundational elements of their case. Defense counsel later sought to challenge aspects of the interrogation and to present background evidence regarding White's upbringing and mental state. Nonetheless, the combination of a direct confession and corroborating forensic evidence produced a decisive prosecutorial narrative. In 2018, a jury convicted White of first-degree murder. The court imposed a sentence of life without the possibility of parole, citing the deliberate nature of the act and the defendant's own account of motive. Appeals and post-conviction challenges were subsequently heard, but in 2020, the conviction and sentence were upheld by higher courts. The case was characterized in legal reviews as a prototypical example of a confession-driven prosecution, in which the defendant's expressed intent eliminated reasonable doubt about premeditation. For the victim's community, the outcome offered finality but no comfort. Case 10. Sep 2012, West Virginia. In a remote, quiet part of the state, 16-year-old Joseph Spencer committed an act that left his community reeling. Inside the family's modest home, Spencer murdered his parents and younger sister in what authorities later described as a calculated yet emotionless attack. Neighbors were stunned. There had been no warnings, no history of violence or mental illness. Teenager waited for police to arrive, offering no resistance. When questioned, he admitted everything. Responding officers entered the residence to a grim scene. All three victims, Spencer's mother, father, and 12-year-old sister, were found dead from gunshot wounds. Joseph Spencer had called 911 himself and remained on the scene when authorities arrived. No external signs of forced entry or struggle were evident. The firearm was recovered at the scene. In initial interviews, Spencer stated he had simply decided to kill his family that day, offering no specific reason. The Spencer family was known locally as kind and reserved. They lived in a rural area with limited contact outside of school and work. Teachers described Joseph as quiet, with average grades and no disciplinary issues. There were no reports of abuse or neglect in the household. The killings shocked even law enforcement due to the lack of any prior signs. The absence of motive deepened the mystery. The community mourned not just the loss, but the senselessness of the act. Spencer offered a full confession at the scene. He waived his right to an attorney during initial questioning and detailed the timeline of the killings. Investigators found no drugs, alcohol, or signs of external coercion. The murder weapon belonged to his father and had been kept in a locked case, which Joseph had apparently accessed prior to the killings. Forensic analysis confirmed his account. Psychological evaluations showed no evidence of psychosis or delusions. Prosecutors charged Joseph Spencer as an adult due to the severity of the crime and his age at the time. His defense did not contest the facts, but attempted to argue for mental health treatment instead of a standard prison sentence. The court denied that motion. There was no plea bargain. The trial was brief. Jurors were shown video footage of the confession and evidence from the scene. The case concluded within months of the murders. Joseph Spencer was convicted on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. During sentencing, Spencer offered no apology, remaining silent throughout. The families of the victims, distant relatives and friends, attended the hearing in tears. The court noted the absence of remorse. The case has remained largely unknown outside the state, a chilling reminder of the potential for violence where it is least expected.
He wasn't here. Kids weren't here. I have no idea where they went. I don't feel like this is even real right now. It's like a nightmare that I just can't wake up from.
She's pregnant as well.
How far along?
14, 15 weeks.
Case 1. On the morning of August 13, 2018, in Frederick, Colorado, 34-year-old Chris Watts appeared before cameras, pleading for the safe return of his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. His tone was calm, his eyes dry, his words measured. He told reporters he just wanted his family back. According to investigators, the first signs of trouble appeared when Shanann's friend reported her missing after failing to reach her for hours. Within days, attention turned toward the husband whose composure seemed too controlled. Police were dispatched to the Watts home after Shanann's friend, Nicole Nachtman, requested a welfare check. The house appeared immaculate, but Shanann's phone, purse, and car were still there. Chris claimed she'd taken the kids to a friend's house, yet his story shifted with every retelling. Body camera footage showed him pacing, arms crossed, struggling to sound convincing. The officer noted his lack of panic and visible detachment. By evening, the search expanded through nearby neighborhoods and fields. But the evidence at the scene didn't match the story Chris told. Surveillance cameras from a neighbor's home soon captured movements that would shatter his lies. Shanann Watts was 34, a driven sales representative for a nutrition company called Thrive. Online, she shared motivational videos and glowing posts about her family. The Watts household, with its new house, matching outfits, and smiling family photos, seemed enviable. But behind the curated image, cracks had formed. Chris was emotionally distant, spending late nights on his phone, and Shanann, then 15 weeks pregnant, sensed something was wrong. Friends later told investigators she feared he was having an affair. The cheerful videos masked tension, mounting debt, and growing silence between husband and wife. It would take only days for that carefully built illusion to unravel. Detectives began reconstructing the family's final hours. The neighbor's security footage showed Chris backing his work truck into the garage early that morning, an unusual move. He stayed inside for nearly an hour before leaving for work. Investigators searched the house, finding no signs of forced entry, but detected a faint odor of cleaning chemicals. When questioned, Chris denied any wrongdoing and volunteered for a polygraph test. He failed. The examiner told him calmly, "There's only one person who knows what happened." That moment cracked the facade. Then, a single security camera revealed what had really happened in the pre-dawn darkness. Confronted with mounting evidence, Chris confessed. He first claimed Shannon had killed their daughters and that he acted in rage, but the truth was worse. He admitted to strangling Shannon in their bed after an argument and then driving her body, along with his still-living daughters, to an oil field owned by his employer, Anadarko Petroleum. There, he buried Shannon in a shallow grave and smothered Bella and Celeste before placing the bodies in separate oil tanks. The confession stunned investigators. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case from tragedy to calculated murder. Public outrage followed immediately. The image of a smiling family man turned killer dominated headlines. Videos of Shannon's positivity became haunting reminders of sincerity destroyed by deceit. In November 2018, Chris Watts pleaded guilty to 9 counts of murder, avoiding the death penalty at the request of Shannon's family. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. From prison in Wisconsin, he rarely speaks, occasionally writing letters to strangers seeking meaning in the aftermath. But no explanation can reconcile the horror of his actions. Chris Watts didn't just kill his family. He destroyed the illusion of the perfect life, proving that evil can wear a smile. Case 2. On June 7, 2021, in rural Colleton County, South Carolina, 53-year-old attorney Alex Murdaugh called 911, his voice trembling as he reported finding his wife, Maggie, and younger son, Paul, shot near the dog kennels of their 1,700-acre Moselle estate. Deputies arrived to a scene of chaos, shell casings scattered, 2 bodies lifeless on the ground, and a man pacing in shock. According to investigators, the first signs of suspicion appeared when details of Alex's timeline began to shift. Within days, attention turned toward the grieving husband whose family name had ruled the region's legal system for generations. The Moselle property was a private empire, a hunting estate owned by one of South Carolina's most powerful families. The Murdaughs had held influence for over a century, serving as prosecutors and lawyers across the Low Country. But that night, the illusion of privilege cracked. Maggie, 52, and Paul, 22, were found shot multiple times, Paul by shotgun, Maggie by rifle. Alex told investigators he had just returned from visiting his mother, claiming he discovered the scene moments later. For the first few weeks, the killings drew sympathy. The community mourned with the Murdaughs, unaware that the deaths would expose one of the state's most tangled webs of corruption and deceit. But soon, the evidence began to contradict his story. For decades, the Murdaugh name meant power. Alex worked at the family firm, his lineage stretching back through 3 generations of solicitors. His wealth came from lawsuits and settlements, his reputation from courtroom victories. But beneath the polished surface, the dynasty was cracking. Lawsuits, mounting debt, and the 2019 boating death of teenager Mallory Beach, involving Paul Murdaugh as a driver, placed the family under scrutiny. Behind closed doors, Alex's law firm had begun discovering missing client funds. By 2021, his empire was collapsing. Prosecutors later revealed that he had been stealing millions to fund an opioid addiction and maintain his lavish lifestyle. It would take only days for the mask to fall completely. Investigators combed through digital evidence, phone data, and GPS records. They discovered that Alex's alibi didn't hold. Cell phone records placed him at the kennels minutes before the murders, contradicting his statement that he hadn't been there. A Snapchat video taken by Paul just before his death contained his father's voice in the background, irrefutable proof of his presence. Forensic accountants then uncovered years of theft, check fraud, and embezzlement from clients and the firm. The murders, investigators believed, were committed to buy time, to generate sympathy and delay exposure of his crimes. Then, a single digital recording revealed what had really happened at Moselle. In July 2022, After months of unraveling financial records and reconstructing timelines, Alex Murdaugh was charged with the murders of his wife and son. The state's theory was clear. He killed to distract from his impending financial ruin and professional downfall. His lies about his location, combined with forensic evidence, built an airtight case. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. He admitted to stealing millions of dollars, but continued to deny involvement in the murders. His deception ran deep. A man who once stood above the law now trapped by it. The trial began in January 2023 and captivated the nation. Prosecutors presented evidence of greed, addiction, and desperation, while the defense painted him as a broken man framed by circumstance. The jury deliberated for just 3 hours. Alex Murdaugh was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without parole. The conviction ended a century-old dynasty that had shaped South Carolina's justice system. In the months that followed, he faced dozens more charges of fraud and theft. The Murdaugh name, once synonymous with power, became a symbol of decay. The dynasty didn't fall to outsiders. It collapsed under its own secrets. Case 3. On January 9, 1993, in the quiet village of Prevessin-Moens, France, firefighters responded to a house engulfed in flames. Inside, they found the bodies of 37-year-old Florence Romand and her 2 young children, Antoine and Caroline. Nearby, the family dog was dead. Upstairs, rescuers discovered 39-year-old Jean-Claude Romand unconscious but alive, overcome by smoke. At first, it appeared to be a tragic accident, a respectable doctor's family killed in a house fire. But according to investigators, the first signs of doubt appeared when no medical identification or hospital records could be found for the man everyone thought was a physician. Within days, the image of the beloved family doctor began to unravel. As authorities examined the scene, inconsistencies surfaced. The fire had been deliberately set. Florence and the children had died hours before the blaze, killed by blunt force trauma. Jean-Claude's injuries were self-inflicted. Detectives soon learned that he had not gone to work that day, or any day. What began as a domestic tragedy evolved into a deception unlike anything France had seen. For 18 years, Romand had pretended to be a successful World Health Organization doctor in Geneva. Each morning, he left home wearing a white coat, kissed his family goodbye, and drove to the Swiss border. But instead of entering an office, he spent his days sitting in parking lots and cafes, reading medical journals to maintain his charade. The discovery exposed a career and a life built entirely on lies. To his family and friends, Jean-Claude was brilliant and humble. His wife, Florence, trusted him completely. His parents were proud of his supposed position at the WHO. Neighbors admired his car, his trips to conferences, and his soft-spoken demeanor. Yet behind the facade was a man with no degree, no job, and no income. He had dropped out of medical school in his 2nd year and never told anyone. To sustain his fabricated life, he convinced relatives and friends to invest money in non-existent Swiss accounts, promising high returns. The funds paid for his house, vacations, and luxury lifestyle. Everyone he deceived was someone who loved him. For nearly 2 decades, they never suspected that the doctor they trusted was a ghost. The investigation revealed how meticulously Romand had constructed his double life. Police searched his car and found maps, fabricated business cards, and WHO pamphlets used to reinforce his identity. They traced phone calls to fake offices and discovered that his claimed salary had been funded entirely by fraud. Forensic accountants uncovered missing savings belonging to his in-laws and family friends. The pressure had been mounting. In early 1993, one friend demanded proof of their investment, and Florence began questioning inconsistencies in his schedule. Romand's false world was collapsing. Detectives concluded that exposure was imminent, and that fear had triggered the violence. Then, interviews with surviving relatives revealed a pattern of manipulation that had trapped them all for years. When interrogated in the hospital, Jean-Claude confessed. He admitted to killing his wife, his children, and his parents to prevent them from discovering the truth. He claimed he loved them too much to let them see his failure. Investigators called it the ultimate act of narcissism, murder disguised as mercy. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. He described his double life as a disease of imagination, insisting that he believed he could keep it alive forever. His confession stunned the nation. It wasn't just murder. It was a collapse of an illusion built on vanity, fear, and deceit. The trial began in 1996 and gripped France. Psychiatrists described Roman as detached from reality, a man who had blurred the line between truth and fiction. The prosecution called him a manipulator who killed out of cowardice, not madness. He was found guilty of 5 counts of murder and sentenced to life in prison with no parole for 22 years. For decades, he remained silent behind bars, occasionally granting interviews to criminologists studying pathological lying. In 2019, after 26 years in prison, Jean-Claude Roman was released on parole, living under supervision in a monastery near Lyon. The decision outraged the public. To this day, he remains a chilling reminder of how lies can become a life and how far someone will go to protect them. Case 4. In 1984, 18-year-old Elisabeth Fritzl vanished from the small town of Amstetten, Austria. Her parents told police she had run away to join a cult, supported by a handwritten letter supposedly from her confirming it. The note, mailed weeks after her disappearance, seemed convincing enough to close the case. Her mother wept with relief, unaware the letter was a lie written under duress. According to investigators, the first signs of truth appeared decades later when a critically ill young woman was rushed to a hospital, carrying a story that would horrify the world. Within days, the secret beneath an ordinary suburban home began to unravel. On April 19, 2008, a 19-year-old girl named Kirsten was admitted to an Austrian hospital in a coma. Her grandfather, Joseph Fritzl, claimed she had suddenly fallen ill. Doctors, however, noticed signs of lifelong malnutrition and lack of sunlight. When they appealed to the public for the girl's mother to come forward, the decades-old missing person case of Elisabeth Fritzl resurfaced. The next day, Elisabeth appeared at the hospital, trembling and pale, claiming to be Kirsten's mother. But when police questioned her privately, she revealed the unthinkable. She had been held captive by her father for 24 years in a hidden basement below the family home. That hospital visit exposed one of the darkest crimes in modern history. Joseph Fritzl was a respected engineer and landlord in Amstetten, known for his precision and privacy. To neighbors, he was strict but ordinary. Beneath his house, however, he had spent years constructing a secret bunker, a soundproof, windowless series of rooms hidden behind a reinforced steel door. He told others it was a fallout shelter, but it was a prison built for his daughter. On August 28, 1984, he lured Elisabeth into the cellar under pretense of helping him carry a door. Once inside, he locked it behind her. For the next 2 decades, he visited almost nightly, controlling every aspect of her life. Over time, Elisabeth gave birth to 7 children. 3 remained underground with her. 3 were taken upstairs to live with Joseph and his wife under false pretenses, and 1 died shortly after birth. The father's obsession had become a world sealed in darkness. When detectives raided the house after Elisabeth's hospital confession, they discovered the unimaginable. Behind a series of concealed panels and corridors lay the underground complex, low ceilings, concrete walls, a single bed, a small stove, and decaying furniture. The space reeked of damp air and confinement. Children's drawings hung on the walls beside makeshift lights that never dimmed. DNA tests confirmed that Joseph was both father and grandfather to the children. Investigators traced years of forged letters Elisabeth had been forced to write, claiming she was living freely. The evidence left no doubt. Then, the officers descended deeper into the hidden rooms, finding proof of a 24-year imprisonment that continued directly beneath an unsuspecting household. When confronted, Joseph Fritzl showed no remorse. He calmly explained how he had created a second family underground and claimed he had provided everything they needed to survive. During interrogation, he confessed to building the dungeon, imprisoning his daughter, and fathering her children. He justified it as a private arrangement gone wrong. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. His admissions matched every detail of Elisabeth's account, from construction of the cellar to the years of psychological control. The confession confirmed that the crime had not been a moment of madness. It had been a life's work of domination. In 2009, Joseph Fritzl stood trial in St. Pölten, Austria, charged with murder, rape, incest, enslavement, and false imprisonment. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to life in a secure psychiatric facility. His wife, Rosemary, divorced him immediately and fled the region. The physical cellar was sealed forever, its entrance filled with concrete. Elizabeth and her surviving children were relocated under new identities and placed in protected care. Today, she lives in anonymity with her family, rebuilding what was stolen. Fritzl remains confined, his attempts to appeal repeatedly denied by Austrian courts through 2025. The case forced an entire nation to confront the horror that had existed undetected for a quarter of a century, a reminder that sometimes evil lives quietly beneath the floorboards of ordinary life. Case 5. In the early hours of January 14, 2018, a 17-year-old girl climbed out of a window in a quiet suburb of Perry's, California, clutching a deactivated cell phone she had kept hidden for months. Her voice trembled as she called 911, telling the dispatcher her 2 younger sisters were chained to their beds. It was the first time she had ever spoken to someone outside her family. According to investigators, the first signs of horror appeared when deputies arrived at the Turpin residence and saw a pale, shaking teenager trying to describe a lifetime of abuse. Within hours, the illusion of a perfect family collapsed. When police entered the single-story house on Muir Woods Road, the smell of decay hit them instantly. Inside, they found 13 children, aged 2 to 29, all severely malnourished, filthy, and frightened. The home was filled with garbage, soiled clothes, and rotting food. Some of the siblings were shackled to their beds, others cowered in corners unable to speak. Their parents, David and Louise Turpin, stood quietly nearby, insisting it was all a misunderstanding. The officers' body cameras captured the shocking scene, a suburban home turned into a prison. That night's discovery would expose years of hidden cruelty behind one of the most disturbing family facades in modern America. David and Louise Turpin had built their lives around the image of religious devotion and discipline. Both raised in strict homes, they believed their family was chosen by God to live apart from a sinful world. They homeschooled their children, dressed them identically, and forbade contact with outsiders. On social media, they posted smiling family photos, coordinated trips to Disneyland, and carefully staged portraits. To neighbors, they appeared unusual but harmless, the quiet family that kept to themselves. Behind closed doors, the children lived in a nightmare. They were starved, beaten, and chained for minor disobedience. Baths were rare. Meals consisted of a few bites of peanut butter, and the children's bodies stopped growing. Their parents' obsession with control had become their religion. Detectives and child welfare officers launched an immediate investigation. They photographed the filthy rooms, piles of waste, and broken locks used to restrain the children. Medical tests confirmed extreme malnutrition, muscle atrophy, and developmental delays. Many of the children could barely speak in full sentences or recall their ages. David Turpin kept detailed journals of punishments, and Louise filmed staged videos of the children singing hymns for relatives online. Interviews revealed a pattern of total domination, sleep deprivation, forced memorization of Bible verses, and threats of damnation if they disobeyed. Then, evidence from the 911 call and the girls' secret photos inside the house revealed what had really happened in the so-called Turpin family home. The arrest came that same day. When confronted, the Turpins confessed to strict discipline but denied abuse. As the investigation deepened, their lies fell apart. Detectives uncovered years of systematic torture and neglect. When confronted with the evidence, the suspects gave statements that shifted the entire case. They claimed they were preparing their children for the apocalypse, justifying their control as spiritual duty. The courtroom would later hear how the children were chained for weeks, forced to live in darkness, and denied medical care. The contrast between their public image and the private reality shocked a nation that had watched them smile for cameras. In February 2019, David and Louise Turpin pleaded guilty to multiple counts of torture, false imprisonment, and child endangerment. They were sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The children, now free, entered the foster system. The world celebrated their survival, but the reality was more complicated. In 2024, news broke that several Turpin siblings had suffered new abuse under foster parents later convicted of exploitation. Despite the setbacks, many of the siblings pursued education and independence, determined to rebuild their lives. Jordan Turpin, the daughter who made the 911 call, became a voice for survivors, speaking publicly about courage and resilience. The Turpin case remains a haunting reminder that evil can hide behind family photos, that sometimes the most picture-perfect homes are prisons in disguise. Case 6. On the morning of May 5, 2009, in Columbia, Illinois, police received a 911 call from 32-year-old Chris Coleman, the head of security for the world-famous televangelist Joyce Meyer. He told dispatchers he was worried. His wife and 2 sons weren't answering their phones. Minutes later, officers arrived at the Coleman home to conduct a welfare check. The house was locked, the blinds drawn, and the silence heavy. According to investigators, the first signs of deception appeared when they entered the home and found a scene of horror that contradicted every image Chris had built of faith, family, and devotion. Inside the house, officers discovered the bodies of 31-year-old Sherry Coleman and her 2 sons, Gavin and Garrett, ages 11 and 9. They had been strangled in their beds during the night. The walls of the home were covered in spray-painted messages. "You have paid, punished," and "I told you so." It looked like the work of a religious extremist targeting the Coleman family for Chris's association with Joyce Meyer Ministries. But the evidence didn't fit. There was no forced entry, and the handwriting on the messages appeared unusually familiar. Neighbors recalled seeing Chris leave for the gym early that morning, calm and alone. By the end of the day, the murders once framed as a hate crime began to look like something much more personal. Chris and Sherry had been high school sweethearts, married young, and admired by their congregation. To outsiders, they were the perfect Christian couple. Smiling photos, family trips, and church events that displayed unity and grace. Chris earned a lucrative salary as Joyce Meyer's chief of security, traveling with the ministry, meeting pastors, and living comfortably in their upscale neighborhood. But beneath the surface, the image was collapsing. Chris was carrying heavy debt and was deeply involved in an affair with a Florida woman named Tara Lintz, one of Sherry's former friends. Text messages later revealed his growing resentment toward his wife and his desire to start over. While Sherry prayed to save the marriage, Chris was planning a new life that couldn't coexist with his public image. The investigation quickly turned toward the supposed death threats Chris had reported months before the murders. He had shown Joyce Meyer and police several emails warning that his family would die because of his job. "Tell Chris his family is dead." One read, "This is punishment." Investigators traced the messages, only to find they had been sent from Chris's own laptop. The staged graffiti inside the home matched the same language and style. Surveillance footage contradicted his alibi. His car was seen parked at home during the time he claimed to be at the gym. Then, forensics uncovered evidence of premeditation. His phone activity paused during the hours of the murders. Each piece of digital proof stripped away the illusion he had so carefully maintained. On May 19, 2009, police arrested Chris Coleman. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. He denied involvement, claiming an intruder had staged the threats, but investigators presented the truth. The emails, the cell phone data, and the timing of the murders all pointed to him. They concluded that Chris had killed his wife and children to escape his marriage without losing his job or his public image. His motive was not passion or rage but reputation, the fear of humiliation in a world where he preached integrity. The trial began in April 2011 and drew national media attention. Prosecutors described the murders as cold and calculated, while the defense struggled to explain the overwhelming digital evidence. After 11 hours of deliberation, the jury found Chris Coleman guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The verdict sent shockwaves through the Christian community, especially Joyce Meyer Ministries, where Coleman had once been trusted as protector of faith. In interviews, Meyer said he could have kept his job even after divorce, a revelation that made his crime appear senseless. Today, Chris Coleman remains imprisoned in Illinois, occasionally claiming innocence. His story stands as one of the most disturbing examples of hypocrisy in American religious life, a man who preached virtue, killed for vanity, and destroyed everything he claimed to defend. Case 7. In the early hours of May 11, 2012, emergency services in Derby, England, responded to reports of a house fire on Victory Road. Flames were tearing through the home of 55-year-old Mick Philpott, a man once known for his large family and frequent television appearances. 6 of his children, Jade, John, Jack, Jesse, Jaden, and Duane, were trapped inside. As firefighters fought to reach them, neighbors watched Philpott collapse in the street, weeping and shouting for help. Television cameras soon captured his grief, turning him into the face of a national tragedy. According to investigators, the first signs of doubt appeared when experts realized the blaze had started inside the house, not from outside as initially believed. The fire began shortly before 4 a.m. and spread with unusual speed. By the time firefighters entered, smoke had filled every room. The children, aged 5 to 13, were found unconscious in their beds. All 6 later died from smoke inhalation. Initially, police treated the incident as a deliberate attack, perhaps revenge from someone targeting the family. Philpott, known to local media as Britain's biggest father, gave emotional interviews outside his burn home, pleading for answers. But investigators noticed inconsistencies. The house showed no sign of forced entry, and accelerant residues were detected near the doorway. Within days, the theory shifted. This wasn't a random act of violence, but something staged from within. Mick Philpott had become infamous long before the tragedy. He was a father of 17 children by multiple women, living on state benefits, and frequently appearing on talk shows to defend his unconventional lifestyle. With his wife, Mairead, and longtime mistress, Lisa Willis, he shared a crowded household that became tabloid fodder. He thrived on public attention, presenting himself as both victim and showman. But beneath the bravado, he was violent, controlling, and deeply manipulative. When Willis finally left him in early 2012, taking her 5 children, Mick lost not only control but also the welfare payments tied to them. To him, it wasn't love lost, it was status, money, and dominance slipping away. His obsession with revenge began the moment she walked out the door. Forensic investigators traced the cause of the fire to the downstairs hallway. Samples revealed traces of petrol, suggesting deliberate ignition. Surveillance footage from a nearby petrol station showed Mick and Mairead purchasing fuel the day before the fire. Detectives also recovered phone records revealing coordination between Mick, Mairead, and their friend Paul mostly hours before the blaze. The plan, prosecutors later alleged, was to start a small fire at the house, rescue the children, and frame Lisa Willis for attempted murder. It was meant to restore Mick's reputation and win back public sympathy. But their timing and execution went fatally wrong. Then, during the second round of questioning, Mairead's composure cracked, and she began revealing details that exposed the truth behind the tragedy. Under pressure, Mairead confessed that she and Mick had planned the fire as a hoax to regain media attention and make Lisa look guilty. When confronted with the evidence, the suspects gave statements that shifted the entire case. They claimed they expected to save the children before the fire spread, but investigators showed that the speed and placement of the blaze left no chance of survival. The confession turned the case from an arson investigation into one of reckless indifference and ego-driven cruelty. Prosecutors argue that Mick's motive wasn't insanity or grief, it was pride. He wanted to be seen as a heroic father once again, even if it meant endangering his own children. The trial began in 2013 at Nottingham Crown Court. Jurors heard testimony about Philpott's history of violence, manipulation, and control over the women in his life. The prosecution described him as a man consumed by narcissism, incapable of empathy. Mairead and Paul Mosley were charged alongside him. All 3 were found guilty of manslaughter. On April 4, 2013, Mick Philpott was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 15 years. His wife and Mosley received 17-year sentences. The verdict ignited national outrage. Media outlets condemned the case as a grim reflection of exploitation and moral decay, while charities demanded reforms to prevent similar abuses of the welfare system. Mick Philpott remains behind bars, remembered not as a grieving father, but as a man who killed his children to feed his ego, a tragedy born not from poverty, but from pride. Case 8. In November 1971, neighbors in the quiet town of Westfield, New Jersey, began to notice something odd about the grand Victorian mansion at 431 Hillside Avenue. The lights, once glowing through elegant windows, were dark. The mail piled up, milk deliveries sat untouched, and the family car remained in the driveway. Days turned into weeks with no sign of the List family. According to investigators, the first signs of alarm appeared when concerned neighbors finally alerted police. Inside the house, officers would uncover one of the most methodically planned family murders in American history, and a letter that revealed a killer convinced he was saving souls. When police entered the mansion on December 7, 1971, they were struck by an eerie silence. Organ music played softly through the intercom system, echoing through the halls. In the ballroom, 5 bodies lay neatly arranged on sleeping bags: wife Helen, daughter Patricia, sons John Jr. and Frederick, and upstairs, his elderly mother, Alma. Each had been shot at close range. A note on the desk addressed to the family's pastor explained everything. John Emil List had executed his family to save them from corruption of the world. It was a confession steeped in religion, control, and delusion. The house, cold and meticulous, told a story of planning, not passion. John List had been the image of a respectable man, a devout Lutheran, a veteran, and a quiet accountant. He lived by rigid moral rules. But beneath the calm exterior, his life was collapsing. He had lost his job and was secretly unemployed for months, too proud to tell his family. Each morning, he dressed in his suit, carried his briefcase, and spent the day at the train station reading newspapers until it was time to come home. Financial ruin loomed. His wife's health was failing, and his children were becoming more independent. To List, the world felt spiritually doomed. In his mind, he believed that killing his family would send them to heaven and spare them the shame of poverty. It was a deadly distortion of faith. After the murders, List vanished. Detectives followed every lead, but he left almost no trace. The mansion's thermostat had been turned low to slow decomposition, and he had cut himself out of every family photo to hinder identification. Weeks passed before the bodies were even discovered, and by then, List was long gone. The house, nicknamed Breeze Knoll, became infamous, a monument to quiet horror. Over the next 18 years, the case grew cold. Then, in 1989, forensic artist Frank Bender created an age-progressed clay bust of List for the television program America's Most Wanted. The model showed an older man with glasses and a receding hairline, a hauntingly accurate prediction that would soon break the case. The bust aired nationwide, and within days, a neighbor in Richmond, Virginia, called police. The man living next door, known as Robert Clark, matched the sculpture perfectly. He was an accountant, a churchgoer, and a quiet husband. When authorities approached him, he calmly denied wrongdoing but agreed to go to the station. Fingerprint confirmed what his demeanor did not. Robert Clark was John List. When confronted with the evidence, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. After 18 years in hiding, he simply said, "Yes, I am John List." His composure was chilling, his tone measured, as if admitting to a minor lie rather than mass murder. In 1990, List stood trial for 5 murders. His defense argued mental illness, claiming he believed he was acting on divine instruction to save his family from eternal damnation. Prosecutors countered that the crime was premeditated and driven by pride, not faith. The jury agreed. John List was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms. He showed no visible remorse. From prison, he gave rare interviews, insisting that his actions had been God's will and expressing only mild regret that his plan had failed to end his own life. He died behind bars in 2008 at age 82, unrepentant to the end. The case of John List endures as one of the most chilling examples of religious delusion turned deadly, a man who murdered his family not in rage, but in cold conviction that he was doing right. Case 9. For over 3 decades, the city of Wichita, Kansas, lived under the shadow of a faceless killer known only by 3 letters: BTK, bind, torture, kill. To his neighbors, Dennis Rader was a quiet compliance officer, church president, and Boy Scout leader. He attended services, raised 2 children, and enforced city codes with politeness. But by night, he became one of America's most methodical serial killers. According to investigators, the first signs of terror appeared in January 1974, when a family of 4 was found murdered inside their suburban home. The crime would begin a decades-long hunt for a man hiding in plain sight. On the morning of January 15, 1974, police entered the home of the Otero family after a relative reported concern. Inside, they discovered the bodies of 38-year-old Joseph, his wife Julie, and their 2 children, Joseph Jr. and Josephine. Each had been bound, strangled, and arranged with deliberate precision. There were no signs of forced entry. Detectives described the crime scene as unusually organized, controlled, ritualistic, and cold. Later that year, letters arrived at local news stations and police headquarters. The writer claimed responsibility, detailing the motives with information only the killer could know. He signed the message with the chilling acronym BTK. What began as a local homicide case became a psychological chess match between a killer and an entire city. Dennis Rader appeared to be the model citizen. Born in 1945, he worked for a home security company before joining municipal code enforcement in Park City. He was married, devoutly religious, and active in community programs. Friends described him as strict but responsible, obsessed with order and rules. Yet beneath the normal facade lived a compulsion for domination and suffering. Rader later confessed that he developed violent fantasies as a child, which he carefully disguised behind his calm demeanor. His victims, chosen at random, were often women living alone, stalked for weeks before their deaths. The contradiction between his public virtue and private violence defined him. He was a neighbor everyone trusted, and the monster no one suspected. The investigation into BTK consumed Wichita for years. Police received dozens of letters, poems, and coded messages from the killer, who taunted detectives for their failures to catch him. He described his murders as projects and gave each victim a number. Despite the detailed communication, BTK would vanish for long stretches of time, sometimes decades, only to re-emerge when public attention faded. Forensic technology in the 1970s and 1980s failed to produce matches, leaving detectives frustrated. By the late 1990s, many believed BTK was dead or imprisoned. Then, in 2004, after 25 years of silence, a letter arrived at a local newspaper. The message contained photographs, a victim's driver's license, and a word puzzle. The game had begun again, and police knew the killer was still watching them. In early 2005, BTK sent a new message on a floppy disk, asking police if it could be traced. Detectives, playing along, told him it was safe. The disk was analyzed and revealed metadata linking the file to Christ Lutheran Church and a user named Dennis. Investigators cross-referenced the information with church records and found Dennis Rader, the longtime president of the Congregation Council. They began surveillance, collecting DNA from a discarded tissue used by his daughter. It matched the crime scene evidence perfectly. When confronted with proof, the suspect gave a statement that shifted the entire case. Rader calmly confessed, describing each murder in exacting detail, expressing pride in his precision. He showed no remorse, only irritation that his capture ended his projects. In June 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom fell silent as he described each killing with chilling composure, recounting how he bound his victims, documented their deaths, and returned to their homes to relive the crimes. He was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms, ensuring he would never be released. Even after conviction, investigators continued to review unsolved cases across Kansas, suspecting his involvement in more deaths. Rader remains in prison at the El Dorado Correctional Facility, maintaining the same cold demeanor that once fooled his neighbors. His name had become synonymous with the banality of evil, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous killer is the one who sits in the church pew, smiling, while his city trembles in fear. Case 10. On August 30th, 2023, police in Ivins, Utah, responded to a 911 call made by a terrified 12-year-old boy who had escaped through a window of a home belonging to therapist Jody Hildebrandt. The child was emaciated, covered in duct tape, and begging for food and water. When officers arrived, they discovered evidence of prolonged abuse, open wounds, restraints, and signs of starvation. Within hours, the case drew nationwide attention. According to investigators, the first signs of recognition appeared when they realized who the woman inside the house was, Ruby Franke, a well-known YouTube personality whose channel, 8 Passengers, had once been a portrait of wholesome family life. The 911 call described a boy who looked malnourished, with tape around his wrists and ankles. Deputies entered the property and found another child in similar condition. The home, belonging to Hildebrandt, co-founder of the controversial counseling organization Connections, appeared empty of normal living conditions. Both children were immediately hospitalized. Ruby Franke, 41, was arrested at the scene, while Hildebrandt was taken into custody shortly afterward. The incident shocked the millions of viewers who had followed Ruby online for years, watching her videos about strict parenting, faith, and moral discipline. The discovery exposed a hidden world of control, punishment, and fanaticism behind what had once seemed like an ordinary suburban family brand. Ruby Franke began 8 Passengers in 2015, chronicling her life as a mother of 6 in Utah. The channel grew to nearly 2.5 million subscribers, featuring family meals, homework routines, and moral lessons. Her husband, Kevin, appeared occasionally, but Ruby's parenting drew criticism long before her arrest. In one viral video, she refused to give lunch to her young son as punishment, calling it a learning opportunity. As her content became more severe, viewers raised concerns about emotional abuse. In 2022, Ruby stepped away from YouTube and began working with Jodi Hildebrandt, a therapist known for promoting extreme obedience under the banner of truth and repentance. Together, they created Connections, a program that blurred the line between therapy and cult ideology, isolating followers, enforcing punishment, and framing suffering as spiritual correction. When detectives entered Hildebrandt's home, they found clear evidence of prolonged captivity. Food was locked away, duct tape and rope was scattered throughout, and windows had been sealed. The children described being denied water, beaten, and forced to perform tasks for repentance. Forensic examination showed severe malnutrition and wounds consistent with restraints. Investigators learned that Ruby's other 4 children had also been isolated from relatives for months. Jodi Hildebrandt's writings, seized from the home, outlined doctrines of humility through suffering, describing control and starvation as acts of divine love. Then, during interviews with the rescued children, a detailed pattern of abuse emerged, one that transformed an internet scandal into a criminal indictment. Within days, both women were charged with multiple counts of aggravated child abuse. When confronted with the evidence, the suspects gave statements that shifted the entire case. Ruby claimed she had been helping her children repent, while Hildebrandt described the punishments as spiritual correction. Prosecutors rejected their explanations, calling the acts deliberate torture disguised as therapy. Forensic data from Connections videos and text messages revealed planning and coordination between the 2 women. The case expanded as authorities found records showing Ruby had cut ties with her extended family months earlier, under Hildebrandt's influence. The partnership between the influencer and the therapist had turned into a closed system of manipulation, where faith was twisted into justification for cruelty. In February 2024, Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt both pleaded guilty to 4 counts of aggravated child abuse. The courtroom fell silent as prosecutors read graphic details of the suffering inflicted on the children. Each woman was sentenced to serve up to 30 years in prison, 60 years combined. During sentencing, Ruby broke down, stating she had been deceived by evil, while Jodi remained expressionless. The case reignited a national debate about parenting content on social media and the blurred boundary between influence and exploitation. YouTube permanently deleted 8 Passengers, and Utah lawmakers began drafting bills regulating family vlogging. The surviving children remain under state protection and ongoing care. The story of Ruby Franke and Jodi Hildebrandt stands as a warning of what happens when image, power, and faith collide, when a family built for the internet becomes a prison built by belief.